Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making. Help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guests. With me today is Jennifer Elder, who is a CPA and certified speaking professional, helping leaders future-proof their businesses by making smart decisions and staying ethical. Jeff Ikler is a certified executive career coach. He is the director of Equating Executive Career and Personal Leadership Coaching, co-host of the Getting Unstuck podcast, Cultivating Curiosity, and an author of the weekly Substack, Walking in the Woods. And Tomer Yogev is an executive coach and co-creator of the Big Joy Theory, a transformative movement that begins with each person stepping into their own light, despite the shadows and storms. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
Here is our topic. This past Memorial Day, Delta Flight 694 from Detroit to Los Angeles diverted to Minneapolis to provide emergency medical care. Not to a passenger, but to a passenger's pet dog. An airline spokesman told Newsweek that, quote, "The safety of our customers and people comes before everything else at Delta. That's why Flight 694 diverted to ensure a cabin pet that became ill received proper care." The emergency landing delayed 181 passengers from reaching their destination by 2.5 hours. There's no question that the life of a human being justifies inconveniencing even a few hundred paying passengers, but does the same calculus apply to animals? Would the airline have made the same call had the pet been a hamster, a lizard, or a canary? Pet owners may agree that dogs are people too, but does that make it so? Is there a danger that by projecting too much humanity onto animals, we undermine the sanctity of human life as a foundational principle of civil society? For years, the Great Apes Project has lobbied to accord full human rights to gorillas, orangutans, and chimpanzees. Is this a noble effort or an ideological perversion? Does it naturally follow that one of its most prominent advocates, former Princeton bioethics professor Peter Singer, has also been cited as one of the most vocal supporters of euthanasia? Is it insensitive to value the convenience of a plane full of people above the life of a beloved pet? Or is it recognizing a more existential moral boundary? The floor is open. I was afraid of this, that after talking about politics and all the hot button issues, this might just be too incendiary for guests to weigh in on.
Getting between people and their pets, or as some people would call them, their fur babies, that might be more incendiary than politics.
And full disclosure, Jennifer, you are a pet owner.
Yes. But there are some interesting questions in here. Having flown with pets before, there is a disclaimer that you have to sign that says that the airline is not responsible for the safety of your pet. So there's that part of it. There's obviously, if it was my pet, I know what I would want to have happen. But you might also think about the other passengers who were, aside from being inconvenienced, we don't know what these passengers were traveling to. Conceivably, there could have been somebody on that flight who was traveling for surgery. And that could have been an issue, or they're traveling to make a connection, or I guess you said they were traveling to LA. They could be taking a cruise, and they might have missed when the cruise ship left the port, and that means now they're out. So there are.
That's a really interesting point that I didn't think of. The potential collateral damage. We're not just talking about a couple of hours being lost. There could be many other forms of fallout that could affect people's lives, perhaps in a very dramatic way.
Especially when you consider this is 181 people traveling almost cross country. You don't do, I mean, obviously some people do that just for fun, but invariably out of 181 people, there's someone there who's doing it for a very important reason, whatever that business reason, emotional, attend a funeral that they've now missed, or a cruise, as Jennifer said, or possibly, they were going to go out there to stop a crime, save a life. These are, all of these unknowable things that have now been disrupted, possibly ruined, in the name of saving this dog, which of course is very noble. And as a dog owner myself, as Jennifer said, had it been my dog, I would have been pounding on that cockpit door. I don't question that. And there's so much fallout from this. What struck me too is this isn't just a purely kind of moral, ethical decision. It's a business decision. Delta is a commercial enterprise. This flight will now be marked as late. They also get some marketing cachet or perhaps negative repercussions for having saved this dog. It is a public company owned by shareholders. Its mandate is to create profit for its shareholders. You can look at legal cases all the way back to Ford v. Dodge over 100 years ago that pretty much say Delta exists for profit. And you would theoretically have to defend this decision from yes, while it caused us a delay, it makes us look good and pet owners will fly us more, right? It's not that you can't make a bad business decision, but you have to at least be able to defend it from a position of profitability as a executive of a public shareholding company.
Yeah, that's interesting, Tomer, because I was thinking kind of the opposite, that let's say they had landed and the dog had died. That could have been a PR disaster for them. Look at these insensitive people that only care about their profits, and they wouldn't even, go out of their way to save the life of a beloved pet.
Which again goes to your point around, had it been a goldfish, the question there is real easy. Yeah. But a dog, people really love dogs. We ascribe, not human level value, but a much higher value to dog life than we do to worm life. Mm-hmm. And yet at the end of the day,
that raises another question here is the kind of intent behind turning around or landing in Minneapolis or wherever they landed. Was it because they truly wanted to save the life of the dog, or were they saving the life of their reputation? It was just a few years ago that United had a major PR disaster because a puppy died on board. And people didn't read the whole story. What they read was puppy died on United plane. So, in the days of journalism of shock and awe headlines, if this dog had passed away, would anybody read the whole story? And, I don't know the whole story. Was the dog the equivalent of 102 years old? I don't know. Should they have been on the plane in the first place? I don't know. But, to Tomer's point, Delta is a business. They answer to shareholders. And there's the question of what might create the bigger loss. Is it the 181 people who are, or 180? The pet parent is happy, but maybe the other 180 are not so happy. But compare that to the thousands that would read the headline, dog dies on Delta flight because they won't turn around.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
So, Jennifer, to your point about not knowing the whole story, I was really curious about this. And the first thought that popped into my head was this a service dog? And I Googled the story because I figured if Yonason is putting it out there, it must be well documented somewhere. So, and it was. There were a number of stories. Never mentioned service dog, but I think that's an interesting idea to consider. Would it make a difference in our discussion if this were a service dog? Is it a dog that's protecting somebody from a diabetic incident or something? You know, what I found, and this is this would not hold up in court, I understand, but the fallout from this was extremely positive. The people who read the story and commented, who took the time to comment, were extremely positive about Delta and what they had done. Somebody wrote, something remarkable happened. No one complained. Not a single voice of protest was raised. This is on the plane. And when the flight resumed, the mood in the cabin shifted from tension to awe. Applause erupted. I'd like to think that we would do that we would land to take care of something that is important to people. But Tomer, I hear your point about, well, what if somebody is in need of surgery? You know, what if there's an emergency? And hopefully, we don't know this, but hopefully there was some discussion on board, or if people had these serious issues, perhaps they could have raised them. I really like in this day and age that this happened, that there was this kind of empathy shown. If I had my dog with me, I sure wish Delta would act the same way. And just a point of serendipity. I don't normally read this paper. This is from the New York Post, which is kind of it's kind of a rag, if you will. The headline on June 19th, 2025, dogs are immediate family. New York judge rules in unprecedented decision over dachshund run over by an out-of-control driver. So this person was taken to court. He's being sued, and the Supreme Court justice is upholding this decision to sue him because they're looking at this dog as an immediate family member. I just thought that was an interesting little bit to layer on this.
And I think what you're mentioning, Jeff, there, it's really interesting that you're happy that this is happening in this day and age. And I agree with that. I like this, hearing this story made me smile that 180 people were willing to be, from my perspective, mildly inconvenienced in the name of saving a dog's life. And I would argue that X years ago, pick your number, 30, 50, 100, that would not have been the case. And I do think that you're seeing sort of an arc towards greater, I'll call it humanity. And where do we draw that line? Again, I don't think that if someone's, pet worm was suddenly ill, they would have at all considered diverting this flight. And yet at the same time, what we can recognize is there's something intrinsically universally valuable about life. We don't understand it. We don't know where it comes from. We know we can cram a bunch of atoms and molecules together. That does not produce life, that there's something else that we don't know. And so to say, oh, the spark of that exists in a human being is therefore more valuable than a dog, than a hamster, than a snail. Obviously we know where we get that from. It comes from sort of religious ethos, but it does sort of smack of the same sort of othering that we as humanity have been working our way out of through all of our isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, you name it, right? It's the other is scary, I'm more valuable, and we slowly but surely chip away at that over time. So I don't know where that line gets drawn. I'm not going to pretend to know. But it is interesting to watch that needle move, even over the course of just our lifetime.
When we talk about sanctity of life, I mean, you framed it already for us, Tomer, that intuitively we all agree there's a difference between a dog and a worm, maybe a dog and a goldfish. Now we start getting into a dog and a bird, or a dog and a rodent. Yeah, the line gets blurrier unless we make a hard distinction between human beings and non-human beings. And certainly one of the excuses for racism, and Nazism and so many of these forms of you know, cultural attacks on others, their rationale was to equate this group with animals. So they themselves were justifying the degradation of human beings by saying that they were not fully human, which is kind of interesting because that implies a recognition that there is a distinction between human and non-human. But once we blur that line, what about this Great Apes Project? What are we going to say to somebody who says, well, chimpanzees have IQs that are maybe not far off to some human beings. They have certain human-like qualities. Why should we not accord them full human rights?
It's a great question. And again, it gets into this gray, because there are chimps who are in fact more intellectually capable, if that's the measuring stick we're going to use, than some humans who have, severe mental deficiencies or other things like that. But we're not going to sit here and say that those lives are worthless. At least we don't anymore. We used to. But again, I think that's that othering that feels so natural. It feels so protective. When you look at racism, Nazism, all of these isms, it's fear-based. It is self-preservation based because I'm scared of the other thing at the end of the day. And so I then denigrate it and make it unhuman in there. And even there, it still doesn't really answer our question because we can't draw just a complete hard black and white. What, we're going to kill 1 million chimpanzees before we're going to let one human die? Now even if we get into they're worthless, how much less? What's the ratio now? And so it's just, it always is going to smack of this. And I don't know if there is anywhere where a line gets drawn that is correct. It does boil down to the individual person's morals and ethics.
Yeah. I'm not sure that there is any single definition of what makes someone or something human. Is it genetics? Is it intelligence? To your point, there are great apes like the infamous Coco who learn to communicate. There are, now we have dogs and cats that have learned to use buttons to speak, and are putting together short sentences. So at what point do we decide what's human? And in our original question here is, how do you define what is a life worth saving? So Yonason, you'd asked what, would it be different if it was a hamster or a squirrel? the Jeff mentioned service animals. There was a huge issue around service animals previously, where people started bringing miniature horses, miniature pigs, a peacock, and called those service animals.
And the airlines did put a stop to some of that.
Yes, so the airlines started bringing in some bit of a bright line in that, but they still have not required formal documentation so yes, I could put a little vest on my cat and call them a service animal. And the airline is not allowed to ask questions or ask for documentation. So, who gets to make these decisions over what are these bright lines? Because Tomer, as you said, if people have their bright lines, and we put those in place to protect ourselves. And they may not make sense to other people, but they make sense to us. But we're asking questions about things that I'm not sure there is a single definition.
Right. I also couldn't separate this from the context of today. And I had just read an article about Elon Musk appearing on Joe Rogan's podcast, his 3-hour podcast, where he talked about the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. And to see how various employees have been treated in this country recently, and to see the ease at which supplemental food is taken away from kids who need it. Tomer, to your point, it's like the pendulum has swung in some areas from this, and I'm also thinking about the number of times I'm in stores and restaurants where people come in with dogs, and dogs are completely accepted in these environments where they didn't used to be. It's rare now to say no pets allowed. I mean, even in finer establishments, and I'm comfortable with that because I love dogs, and I wish I could have a dog where I live. We're not allowed to have a dog in our co-op, but I can't separate. My point is, I can't separate the question that Yonason has raised from the context in which we live today. I think it has bearing.
And it's interesting to bring up Elon Musk, Jeff, after your earlier comment about the passengers applauding. It's whether and I still haven't made up my mind completely on this topic of the airline, what it should have done, but I find it encouraging that an entire plane load of people would have that sense of empathy, to not only accept but applaud the decision to show empathy for both the dog and its owner. In my ethics programs, I have an acronym, and the E in ethics is empathy. I think it is what makes us human. And if you're going to take a purely utilitarian view of life, then you could make that case that empathy is something we should do away with because it's just an interference. But in doing so, we destroy our own humanity. In the same way that terrorists exploit the freedoms of our society to try to destroy our society. Well, if we shut down the freedoms, then we've given them a victory because we have allowed them to turn us into something that we aren't.
Mm.
So there is always going to be this kind of tension between the pragmatism the calculation of relative value and the sense of humanity that, for reasons we can't always define and can't always quantify, may supersede those calculations.
And I think to go to that completely utilitarian approach is backwards. I think it from, again, sort of the arc that we as a civilization are on. Look, slavery is super profitable. You don't have to pay for the labor. It's great, but it's obviously ethically reprehensible, and it's why we've more or less removed it from the earth. But there's no doubt that if you don't pay the people who work for your business, you make more, right? There's utility in that. And I think that what we find ourselves, I think we're in sort of an interesting time as just humans, where we're really pivoting out of this resource acquisition phase, where the team that had the most guns, the most gold, the most wheat, what have you, kind of won, to now there's actually enough. If we wanted to feed everyone on Earth, we could. It's a choice that we made to not really allow that to happen. There's enough food for all 8 billion of us on this planet. It's just we choose not to distribute it quite as evenly as we might otherwise. And so it becomes this question of sort of distribution of resource as opposed to this acquisition. And I think we're having a hard time letting go of sort of that old model. And Elon Musk, the richest man on earth, is a great example of someone who has acquired a great deal of resources. And, he's not the most charitable billionaire out there and is struggling with what it would mean to actually distribute it. So I'm not surprised to get a quote like that out of a person like that. But I think that broadly, we are kind of moving there. We're starting to see that there is more value in, I'm not going to go full on, communist, everyone gets the same, but that there is sort of, I'm losing the term, but the minimum income things that people are trying to put out there, where people will just get $1,000 a month for just being a citizen, and that's it, right? Just these sort of basic baseline resource distribution sort of things. I think they speak to the same sort of ethical quandary that we're wrestling with here around value of life. What do we do? This time that got wasted of all these people for a dog and the value of that dog's life. It all fits within this kind of greater view of what are we trying to do now?
To that point, part of the one big beautiful bill that was actually taken out of the bill before it went up for vote was the mandatory sale of 2 million acres of public land and upwards of 300 million acres of public land. And this was sponsored by Mike Lee of Utah, Senator Mike Lee of Utah. And ostensibly he was saying, well, this is going to give us the ability to build more homes, more low-income homes. But what it was really all about was selling off this land to corporate interests who could mine, forest, drill in order to get resources. And there was an enormous public outcry, of which I'm proud to say I was part of, because I appreciate using public lands, that I don't know if it influenced taking out of the bill as much as the people who look at the bill and said, well, this really isn't legally this can't be legally part of this bill. But the bottom line was there was this public outcry, enough is enough. We don't need to continue to do this to public land just to enrich a few people.
It's, these issues come up with some frequency. And what I rarely hear is an actual dialogue, a real-time dialogue about the pros and the cons. I mean, certainly we need resources. We need oil, we need gas, we need lumber. I also, every summer, my wife and I go to one of the national parks because we value and we love being able to have those resources to enjoy the beauties of nature. And so, the idea that every piece of public land is sacrosanct, we do need the resources. Who's going to benefit from them? Is it going to be the corporations? Is the products going to benefit the people? And I, personally, this is a dilemma I have on so many issues. How much time do I have to research every one of these issues to actually find out the pros, the cons, who's being accurate, who's representing their case? It's paralyzing. And the whole concept of a democratic republic is that we vote for representatives that we trust to research and make these decisions. And just speaking for myself, I often have trouble finding candidates that I trust to vote for. Which sort of leads us to that point you made earlier, Tomer, about, we are not distributing resources. Well, who's the we here? I mean, on some metaphysical level or even social theoretical level, right? We the people, it means all of us. But then you've got this question of how do you change the system? How do you change the culture? How do you hold people accountable? And then we get into really intractable questions that I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer in the next 15 minutes.
Well, one of the things I'll throw out there for an individual to make those decisions is, within psychology, there's a concept of joy. And one of the really lovely definitions of it that we use all the time is that joy is your heart smiling at you being you. And so if you feel that you are represented in that decision, be it in this case to divert the plane or to not divert the plane, if you feel that that is actually a real manifestation of who you are and what you believe, and in this case, your ethical standing on dog life versus 180 people, that's the right decision for you. And it requires a certain degree of introspection. To your point, it probably requires research around the details to, all the questions that got raised here. Was it a service animal? Was someone trying to get there for surgery, right? Like there's all this research that can be done to make a more precise decision around it. But whoever made that call, be it the captain or some executive at Delta or whatever, I hope that whatever they chose, they feel really good about it, that they feel like, yes, that decision is who I am. And if tomorrow they got fired for that decision, they'd walk out with their head held high going, that's fine. Delta's not the place for me, but this is what I believe, and this is who I am, and I'll take what I believe to a competing airline or some other business or whatever.
I like that. I mean, I like that in the sense that that's really what should guide all of us. And in terms of making ethical decisions, do I have the information I need? Have I evaluated my own potential unconscious bias? Have I used reason tempered by intuition to evaluate fully the question? And have I reached a conclusion that I have confidence? I've sincerely made the effort to get to, as best I can, what I believe is the best possible decision here. And then I'm prepared to follow that through, even if the consequences may be unpleasant I mean, that's a really good formula. And it's not always going to
That
get us all to the same place, but at least we can respect one another for where we end up. Jennifer.
I would add one element to your analysis in that I think when we are facing ethical dilemmas, one of the other pieces we need to think about is who are all the affected parties.
Mhm.
Very often when you see a negative ethical situation, people did not consider everybody else. And I think that the difference between a difficult decision and an ethical dilemma is that in the ethical dilemma, somebody is going to get hurt. There's a downside to that is impacting someone. And as humans, we are hardwired to avoid pain to ourselves. So very often when you're faced with an ethical dilemma, all of a sudden the blinders come on. And it's like, la, 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 I can't think about other people. I'm focused on, let me limit my pain. Which is why often when there are cases of fraud, when it comes to light, there are all kinds of people who come up and say, I knew something was going on. Well, if you knew something was going on, why didn't you say something? Well, because no, I can't speak up. That would hurt me. So I think we really need to think about all the parties impacted and recognize the fact that when we make a decision in an ethical dilemma, that somebody is getting hurt. And are we conscious of that, not just our bias to protect ourselves? And it's not, and weighing the pain is not an easy thing. Do I protect myself? Do I think about the greater good? Do I think about what's most fair across the board? I mean, there are half a dozen different ethical theories that would come to different answers depending upon your perspective. And no matter what ethical theory you use, you are right from that perspective. But it's understanding, and I think that's what makes ethics a fascinating topic, no matter what we're discussing, is that there are multiple right answers. And if we, do you turn around a plane because of a sick animal? The majority of people applauded when they got back on the plane. Was there somebody on that plane who was probably going, I'm 2.5 hours late? There probably was. It's hard to say. Did the entire plane applaud? And from their perspective and their approach, they are right as well. And that's where I think it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to your point that it may often be the process we go through to get to our decision that's more important than the decision we reach, as long as we've done it in integrity. You remind me of a dilemma we had in a previous episode some time ago, a plane flight where a number of people on the flight were headed for a Taylor Swift concert. And they spontaneously broke out into Taylor Swift songs. And there were people on the flight who were tweeting, if I could get this window open, I'd jump out. And it was really interesting because most of my panel that day came down on the side that the people who wanted to sing and have a good time should be sensitive to the people on the plane who don't want to be exposed to that. So an interesting counterpoint. And Jeff, you have a thought you want to wrap things up with?
Sorry?
You have a thought you want to wrap things up with?
Well, I like this idea. You and Jennifer have both raised this idea that we need the opportunity to examine this from different points of view. And two data points. so much of this bill that just passed, this 900-page bill, was not discussed in open forum. A lot of the legislators said, I don't even know what's in here, right? There was no way I could know what was in here, but they're forced to vote for this, right? And they wind up voting for things that now they say, well, I didn't know about that. But the other point, and this isn't exactly apples to apples to the dog on the airplane situation. One of the guests that I had on the podcast, a guy by the name of Ben Goldfarb, wrote a book called Crossings. And Crossings has to do with creating structures whereby animals can get from one side of a highway to the other, either an overpass or an underpass, so that they're not running out into traffic and causing accidents. This was in many Western states brought up to legislatures and debated, openly discussed. And we had insurance companies, we had businesses, we had animal rights activists all saying we need to build these crossings, not necessarily for the same reason. Insurance companies wanted to lower their exposure because of accidents. Animal rights activists were pointing out we have 1 million animals a day that are being killed on highways because they can't get from one side to the other. Not just deer, but to your goldfish, guinea pigs, turtles, other animals. They try to get across highways in mass, and they're being slaughtered. The point being, this was openly discussed, debated on, and voted to the point where the federal government was putting $150 million behind this in a pilot program. Now, I don't know if it's still viable because it was voted on prior to the new administration. But when you have the ability to talk about things, all of a sudden people with different perspectives came together to make it happen.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to your point, Jennifer, that there could be lots of reasons that are all good reasons. And they may lead us to different decisions, or in this case, Jeff, they lead us to they lead people to the same conclusion. And now what sounds like it could have been a highly contentious topic, you see that there's a certain consensus that starts to emerge because all the different angles are being considered.
Right.
And I think that the other element there, Yonason, is that even if we don't agree with the final decision, if we had a voice,
there you go,
and could share our opinion. So, I've read other scenarios where people have been asked, do you want to turn around the plane or not? And you're not going to get 100% agreement, but as long as people know that they have been heard and they've shared their perspective, they may not agree with the outcome, but they won't necessarily be angry about it. Yeah. So taking the time to listen to each other and understand our perspective and our reasoning. Now, if somebody's reason is because I said so, that's not a reason. But I think we can all learn from each other and just understand that there is no one same way of looking at things.
Yeah, I mean, that's what transparency is all about. So when people have the chance to understand how decisions are made and why they're made, even if they don't like them, they can still live with them.
Yes.
And that's what we try to do here in this forum, is to look at all the angles to see that there are legitimate ways of seeing an issue that we're not going to necessarily agree on what's the right thing to do, but at least we can start to respect that there is validity to points of view that we might not have considered before. So I thank you all for that conversation. And for you who are watching and listening, if you would like to hear the continuation of this discussion, the backstage portion, you can go to my Substack, look how to become a premium member, sign up, and you'll have access to those. But for now, thank you very much, Jennifer Elder, Jeff Ikler, Tomer Yogev. Really interesting conversation about a topic that doesn't come up every day, but which certainly has plenty of practical application. For those of you who are watching and listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we will take it up on a future episode. And for now, as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.